I got back to him and he said, that's not really enough children dying for this to be worthwhile. And I was like, excuse me? You needed more than one child to be dying? That's a red flag. So that really just made me mad. It activated my Scorpio. And then I was like, oh, game over.
The first person we lead is ourself. Welcome to Because This Matters, a podcast about leading from the inside out. I'm Mark Poise, and in each conversation we explore how values take shape and become action, how people with clarity navigate change, challenge, and growth with intention. My guest today is Dr. Heather Baker. She is an elementary school principal, researcher, educator, and advocate whose work has already impacted thousands of lives. After surviving sudden cardiac arrest, Heather devoted herself to improving cardiac emergency preparedness in schools, training more than 5,000 people in CPR and AED use, also contributing to legislation in Illinois, speaking at the U.S. Capitol, and helping shape national conversations around emergency response. She's also a mother to a young son with a congenital heart defect, an award-winning educational leader, adjunct professor, and national spokesperson for the American Heart Association. Underneath all of those roles is a life shaped by vulnerability, leadership, and caring for others with the awareness that everything can change in an instant. Heather, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that beautiful introduction.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited that we get to talk about these pivotal moments in your life, and we certainly will, but I always like to start in the present. So when you take a look at your life today, are there certain values or principles that are central for you?
Definitely. I definitely live my life through that lens of how can I help other people? How can I be of service? Growing up, I had a stay-at-home mom, but she was her full-time job was being a mom, right? And she was a leader. And I always tell people you don't have to be in a leadership role or a traditional leadership role to be a leader. She really inspired me to be a servant leader. She was the type of mom who pulled over, helped animals, helped somebody cross the street, helped the elderly, visited the nursing home to visit other people's loved ones. And she just showed me the power of thinking about other people, thinking about how your actions, your attitudes, your facial expressions can impact another person's day or life. And so I'm very grateful to my mom for teaching me how to be a servant leader early in life. And vulnerability. I am a big Brené Brown fan, so I'm glad you said that in the intro, but vulnerability is everything to me. And early in my career, I talk about how I thought you had to be this perfect professional in a business suit and always have the right answers and always be polished and know the right thing to say. And after my cardiac arrest, I just kind of threw that out the window and said, I just want to be open and vulnerable and be me. And I'm a silly, weird, fun, goofy person. And when I started to allow that into all aspects of my life, including my professional life, is really where I started to see a lot of success. So when I'm vulnerable and I tell other people, hey, I'm struggling or I need help, that helps them to open up to me as well. So I've really seen the beauty of being vulnerable. So those are two really big tenets for me.
Wow. The interplay of service and vulnerability is a striking one to me, because some people take on this sort of like hero need to save people complex that shouldn't be vulnerable. And especially given your story, I can hear why it came in and how you've accepted it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I see that a lot, especially being in the field of education. We are helpers. And sometimes you see people who cross that line between I'm here because I want the accolades or I want to help because I want something in return. But truly for me, vulnerability is opening up and saying sometimes I can't help. I'm not in a place where I can help you with this right now because I'm struggling. And that was a really, really hard life lesson for me.
Yeah, I feel like I've looked at some of your social presence and all that before we connected, and I feel like you even carry it there to what you share with the world, not just your work, but you're willing to be human through this lens that anyone can see also.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's really what I strive for. I'm an open book, and I think the good, the bad, the ugly. I love influencers who show everything. And I think that's really important to show people that not everything is perfect. And I am somebody who has struggled with anxiety and depression since I was a very young girl. And on the outside, people would say, why? You have a lot going for you. And it's hard to articulate, why you are that way. But I always want people to know that things aren't as perfect, squeaky clean as they might see in a photograph, that there are struggles associated with successes.
Yeah, it's such a valuable thing coming from a high achiever like yourself to be able to call those things out and acknowledge them even on the mental health front
It is not
because
always easy, I will
yeah.
say, and I will never pretend to have all of these things figured out, but it's something that I value and that I work towards. And as have begun to mentor younger sudden cardiac arrest survivors or younger leaders, it's always the thing that I really stress to them the most. Like, it's okay to say you're struggling. It's okay to say you're not okay. For my son, who is 3 years old, it's no secret that our society really puts a lot of pressure on men to not have feelings and emotions. And I am constantly telling him, it's okay to cry, but here are some coping skills for when we're upset too, but I want him to know that feelings are not bad. There are no bad feelings.
Yeah, gosh, it's almost like you deal with kids for a living.
I have a really fantastic school social worker and school counselor. They have taught me a lot, along with my own therapists. But yes, these are the
Yeah.
things that we hope to instill in the next generation.
So sometimes I get to talk to people and their values are kind of hidden under the surface of their life. But when you talk service and vulnerability, I can draw clear connections to your work as a principal and as an advocate and as a trainer. Are there any places in your life these show up that are maybe surprising or like less obvious, but they're still running as a driver for you?
Oh, that's a hard question. You know, I don't know because I do try to live my life with that authenticity of I always say there's one Heather Baker. It's not you might get this Heather on one day and this Heather on the other day. I truly think that this is how I show up every day and that's what I strive for. So I just think that those values are interwoven into everything I do and I have kind of this motto, maybe not a motto, but just a rule that I live by my life by. And it is just that if I am not okay with something, if I don't agree with something, if I think it's wrong, I have two options: do something about it, be a part of the solution, or say nothing, just suck it up. So I have lived my life that way, and I will give you a hint. I'm not the person that just does nothing and sucks it up. So I have always had a strong sense of justice, and since a young kid, my mom's favorite story is from second grade conferences when my second grade teacher told my mom that I was passionate about my cause, and that is my mom's favorite looking back because that has been me tried and true since I was born. If I saw something I thought it was unfair, there I was trying to fix it. So I don't know. I don't think there are any surprises with me.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that justice and fairness. Is that almost like a secondary value too? That it's not just service, but that it's in the service of some ideal. Is
Yeah,
that
it
also
probably
something?
is.
Okay.
Yeah, it probably really is. And I didn't think to call it out that way, when you initially asked. But yeah, usually, that service can be very much driven for me by that seeking of justice. For example, with cardiac arrest and the CPR training, really that was fueled by me thinking it's really unfair and awful and ridiculous that so many people die of sudden cardiac arrest while somebody stood by and watched them die. That is still very much real and very much happening. We have children dying in schools where people are not CPR trained and they wait 15 minutes for 911 to get there. And when I got home from the hospital after my cardiac arrest, I started researching. And when I saw the statistics, like 20,000 children and teens a year, less than 10% survive, I said, this is absurd and it's not okay. And then I met parent after parent after parent that had said, if only my child had gotten CPR right away, just like you, my child would still be here. And I said, oh no, this is not okay. This has to change. So much of what I am doing now is fueled by wanting the same life, the same experience for everybody who experiences sudden cardiac arrest like I did.
Yeah, that moment that it introduces that idea of fairness and that you got to be the beneficiary of something that not everyone does by just prepared colleagues and support and people that took action. And wow, I had never thought about that aspect of this, but what a motivator that would be. And it makes so much sense as you describe it that way.
It is. And of course, first, I do it because I'm grateful to be here. I'm so lucky to be here. And really, it aligned with my skill set. My doctor told me before I even left the hospital after the cardiac arrest, he said, you're an educator. You love to talk. You talk too much. You should share. He said that. You should share this story. Tell people because storytelling is the oldest thing we have, right? It's why this podcast exists. Storytelling has been around for generations and generations. It's how traditions get passed on. It's how things change. And so he said, you need to use your voice. So of course I thought, okay, this is a great way to use my skill set. And then that anger about the unfairness kicked in, and that's what really fuels me. Then I had my son, and for them to tell me while I was pregnant, one, that he probably wouldn't be born alive. He has a rare congenital heart defect, and very few children have survived labor and delivery with this particular heart defect. So we had to fight to make it through labor and delivery, but then to think of him going out into the world, high risk for sudden cardiac arrest, and me not being able to control and know that every person is going to know how to save his life, that is just another layer. Like, that can't be me. I cannot be that parent grieving my child when somebody could have known what to do. So the layers just keep piling up. But I am so happy that this cause found me. As a child who a lot of my depression came from, I didn't know what my purpose was or what my calling was. And so this calling found me, and I'm so grateful, and it saved my life, truly.
Oh my gosh, thank you for taking it there because the meaning level of this is something I
Mhm.
knew we would get into, but you
Yeah.
just instinctively took us there.
I like to
And
dig deep.
yeah, well, me too. Before this happened, because you paint this as a pivotal thing in your life, and you just described what it took you from a little bit,
Hmm.
because it gave you this direction. Are there any values that you held during that more difficult phase when you were navigating some of that depression that you mentioned that aren't present in your life anymore on the other side of this?
I think, like many teenage girls, I was going to college as Facebook was coming about, and that really changed the landscape, for society. I grew up with the magazines of how you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to look. And I wanted to be popular, and I wanted to be, pretty, and I wanted people to like me. I wanted to have a lot of friends, and I wanted to be successful. But I didn't feel whole in any way. I didn't feel like I had a meaning. And that was something early on. I was a great kid. I was funny. I was good at sports. I was good at music. I got good grades. I was in all the honors AP classes, but none of that was fulfilling for me. And I didn't know why. And to an extent, it had me feeling very ungrateful. Like, people would say, you have no right to be depressed because look at, you have it all. And that's where it's hard to explain unless you've experienced it. It's not about having the things. And after my cardiac arrest and finding this purpose and this ability to use my gifts towards a greater good, I feel has just changed everything in my life. It has taken away that question of what am I supposed to be doing and why am I even here? And that weighed so heavily on me from my teenage years up into my 20s.
That is such a common thing that I hear from people that have this innate drive to serve, to make a
Hmm.
difference, that it can feel like an existential burden to not know where, when, and how.
Yes, it was like I have all these skills. I didn't even know what I wanted to be when I went to college. I was an undecided major that drove people nuts because I was like, in the top however many kids in my class. Like I had all the pieces and they're like, what do you mean you don't, you're not saying doctor, lawyer? Just none of those spoke to me. And, I landed within education and it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I'm so grateful. But even when I was teaching in those first couple of years, I was like, I'm good at this. I enjoy it, but something is missing. And it is so hard to explain that. And then at the same time, you have society saying, find your purpose, find it. And I'm like, I'm looking, like I'm looking everywhere and I can't find it. And that's why when I speak to people now, I say, your purpose finds you. I don't think you have to do anything to find your purpose other than to live an authentic life. And when you are living in your authenticity, your purpose will find you through whatever it is that you are doing that makes you happy. So that mindset change has been huge for me too, that I didn't have to find this, it found me.
And it found you in ways that reflected externally and internally, is what I'm hearing.
Hmm.
That those
Yes.
that don't understand mental health struggle, that when they appeal, oh, everything's so good. You have
No.
all these things, and it's like if it were an external problem, we wouldn't be talking about it.
It would be so easy, right? And trust me, I have read every self-help book on the planet. I have listened to every podcast. Like I am a researcher. I have done the research. If I knew how to fix myself, I would have, right?
Yeah.
And so this was just that missing puzzle piece for me. And I think, I can't speak for everyone, but I would bet that if we took the pressure off of ourselves to find what we are supposed to be doing to change the world and you just lived authentically, we would be happier and more successful. And that looks differently for every person. My mom is still a stay-home a caretaker. She's been a caretaker. And, from the outside, some people might say, is she successful? She's never held a big fancy job. She's never had a paycheck. She has a very meaningful, successful existence that has changed so many lives. And I think our society needs to take a look at the way that we measure success, myself included. But that has been something that has evolved for me.
I love how this moment in your life, this day where your heart stopped and
Hmm.
you nearly died and you were brought back, it's become a catalyst. That's the word I like to use, because for some people, it's a pivotal event that goes different directions.
Hmm.
And for yourself, a catalyst, just like in chemistry class, I'm going back to school here myself.
I wasn't good
It,
at the sciences, but I'll stay with you, Mark. I'll stay with you.
a catalyst is change, and we get to decide what the shape and form of that change is. Could we zoom into that moment of catalyst for you just for a moment, and then we'll look at what changed afterwards? When this happened on that day, what sensations or emotions or thoughts did you navigate, whether that day or in the days that followed?
Sure. So the way that this looked was February 1st, 2018. I was a normal, healthy 28-year-old, went to work, first year as a school administrator, and I was the girl in the blazer, first one there, last to leave, trying to be perfect about everything. I did a bunch of meetings that morning, walked into my last meeting of the day, felt like I was going to get sick, took one step to try to get to the bathroom. Boom, my heart stopped. I was on the floor. Luckily, my coworkers saved my life with CPR and the school's AED. So always a plug, shameless plug for CPR training. And I don't remember much after that point until about a week later. So I spent a day in a coma and then a week in the hospital, a week at home, and then back to work they sent me. Not sure how you get time off in this country, but I was out a total of 2 weeks and came back to work after my sudden cardiac arrest. I do remember that conversation where my electrophysiologist stood by my bedside and he told me those statistics and he said, very few people survive. You need to do something with this. But I still wasn't fully present enough, medications and just had surgery and all these other things. And it wasn't until I got home and I literally laid in bed recovering from my ICD placement surgery and I opened my laptop and I just started researching and researching and researching. And I thought, well, this is cool. Yeah, I can share my story. I can look into becoming a CPR trainer. But I think one of the first times that I really felt so much more impassioned was meeting a parent that had lost their child. In Illinois, we have a law called Lauren's Law, and that's named after Lauren Lehman. She was a high schooler here in Illinois, senior in high school the same year as me. We actually were just a couple towns away at our high schools, and she passed away at dance practice with people all around with an AED right next to her body. Nobody used it. Nobody did CPR. And meeting Lauren's parents, talking to them, connecting with them, hearing about how this loss has changed their lives completely. In that moment, I knew for Lauren, for Lauren's family, for every other family, this was it. Like I had to go all in and nothing was going to stop me at that point.
How did you know that? Was it a thinking or a feeling, or how would someone notice that moment for themselves?
I think it was that strong sense of that justice feeling again of like, this is not okay. And I'm not going to stop until that law is passed. And now we got that law passed. And I'm like, I'm not going to stop until that next law is passed because now I'm in so deep, right? I'm in so deep. And the layers that go along with this issue, it's not just about training in schools in Illinois. We have a whole country that's underprepared, whether it's youth sports, park district programs, the workplaces. And so truly I'm never going to run out of work on this topic, I don't think. And I have met hundreds of families at this point that have been touched by this issue. And every story just pumps me up more. So there's no stopping me
Yeah.
now. There's just no stopping me now.
Yeah, you've got a lot of skin in the game. That's
I
for sure.
do.
I can hear
And
that.
it is just, I don't think in 2026, where we have the most amazing technologies doing incredible things, we have more knowledge, more access to knowledge than ever before. How are we walking around not knowing how to save a life when there's a very simple device and a very simple process? Like, it just blows my mind. And so I can't let it go. I just can't. Nobody should
Yeah.
have to die that way when it's preventable.
Yeah, not anymore. Yeah. For
No, that's
for most of
2026.
for most of human history, that would have been the end of your story. And
Sure.
yet now we live in a fundamentally different time where it doesn't have to be.
It
Did
doesn't.
did that impact your sense of day-to-day ordinary life and orient you toward that in any way?
It does. It is interwoven into everything I do. I mean, every hobby I have is heart related. Every spare moment, really is CPR heart focused. And I've found a way to interweave it with my job as an educator. And I'm super grateful for the bosses that I've had, the teachers that I've worked with that have supported that to say, hey, that I can go and do public speaking about making schools heart safe and going and speaking to legislators. I've been really lucky to have people who have supported that. But truly, that's me and that's what I do. And, there is one more thing that I'm thinking about passion. And one thing that I always joke about is I am a Scorpio. So if that means anything to anybody, I'm tried and true Scorpio. And the proof is that I got back from the hospital. I got back to work. I wanted a law for teachers to be CPR trained because that is actually very uncommon in the United States. Very few states have that law. And I called up a couple of legislators. One I had, a connection through a connection through a connection. And I said, hey, I really want to do this. I want to pass this law. And he said, well, I need you to get me the statistics on how many children die in Illinois because I want to make sure that it's, worthwhile. And so I gave him the number. I got back to him and he said, that's not really enough children dying for this to be worthwhile. Um, and I was like, excuse me? You needed more than one child to be dying? That's a red flag. So that really just made me mad. It activated my Scorpio. And then I was like, oh, game over. And on top of that, legislators kept telling me, nah, teachers don't want to be CPR trained. And I said, how do you know that? And they were like, well, they just don't want it. So that's why I got my doctorate and published research where I asked 1,273 educators, do you want to be CPR trained? And 97% said yes. So I said, haha, I told you so. Um, and so maybe, I don't know what you want to call that, but maybe I'm fueled a little bit by haha, I told you so.
I mean, if it's leveraged in such a positive direction,
Yeah, for sure.
fantastic. Yeah. And I can't imagine, especially because you had this happen in your life. How
Yeah.
does it feel when someone acts like it doesn't matter?
I have had to come to terms with the fact that as human beings, we just don't take things seriously until they directly impact us. Like until it happens to you, until it happens to your kid, your spouse, your partner, we tend to do this thing. And maybe it's survival, maybe it's how we protect ourselves. Like, oh, wow, that's sad. That's scary. But then our brain just says, like, not important, not in our orbit. And we just block it out. And so I've had to come to terms with I don't think people are bad. I don't think they are purposefully dismissive, although that one person I am still mad at. I think one child is enough to die. But I think that until it happens to you, we as a species, and I need, a psychologist to weigh in, we just don't it just doesn't stick. And that's why stories are so important, and people like me and survivors who are brave enough to share their stories. And when people hear one story, they say, oh, that was some weird freak accident for this girl. But then you hear an eighth grader, you hear a 16-year-old, you hear all of these stories, and you're like, wait a second, this really could be me or my child or my partner. And then it becomes real. But of course, and I see this in my own job too. And I'm always reminded that, when I taught middle school band and I was at school, band was all that mattered to me. And like reading minutes, I don't care if a kid has to miss reading to come to band because band is what's most important, right? Now I'm a principal and now I see, oh, there's a lot of areas that it's important. But, we all have a passion. We all have one topic. And if that's not somebody else's passion, that's okay. But I'm here to teach you why it's still important.
And you're totally right about how as human beings we filter things out, and
Yeah.
we can say, "Oh, I'm having a great day," and then you might get reminded about something that just happened on the other side of the
Yeah.
world. It's like, "Oh,
Yes.
well, am I a bad person for ignoring that, or how
Right.
much bandwidth do we have?" And it sort of speaks to the difficult aspects of just being a human being,
Yeah.
because we can't do everything, and yet certain things are worth, the squeeze.
Right. And maybe, yeah, we could go so deep into this on how we are just inundated with such bad news all the time that we're a little numb to it, at this point, that you can ignore kind of these tragic stories. But yeah, I think we just have to get really clear about what's important. And certainly saving somebody's life is important, at least to me.
Yeah. I know that before this, you already worked and served as a leader in various ways. You were already, up and running in your professional career. How did your orientation to leadership evolve because of this?
hmm So this is what I've done a lot of speaking about because if I'm being honest, I had a lot of bad habits leading up to my sudden cardiac arrest. And by that I really just mean I was working way too much. I prioritized work over everything. I was staying up too late, waking up too early, and just so immersed in my work, bad eating habits, those types of things. Um, and I went back to that actually right after my cardiac arrest, and I went back to work because I wasn't ready to be vulnerable. I felt embarrassed that I had shown a weakness at that point, and so I wanted to jump right back in, be treated as normal, and to be perfectly normal. And what ended up happening was some pretty big anxiety attacks because I was put back working in the same environment with really no mental health considerations. So PTSD, nobody talked about it, but I just died in this room and now I'm working here. My coworkers that saved my life were traumatized and they were trying to process. And going to work every day, pretending I was normal, but having these palpitations, wondering, oh no, like something feels weird. Am I going to just drop dead right now? And I'm alone in my office. What's going to happen? That anxiety just built and built and built and built until I was driving to work one morning, and I remember it vividly. And I got to this one crossroad, driving country roads, and I had to pull over, and I was having these palpitations, and I got myself into a whole anxiety attack, and I called my coworker who had done the CPR on me, and I said, "I think it's happening again, and I need you to come get me." And he came to get me. My mom drove from Chicago. She took me back to the hospital. Sorry, she took me to the hospital, and they said, "This shouldn't be happening. Like, theoretically, you should be okay right now." But what was happening was the stress and the anxiety were showing up physically in my body as it does. And so I did a lot of research on how stress can kill you. And actually, ironically, I have a book sitting right next to me. I met a public speaker named Liz Green, and she's a cardiac arrest survivor as well. And she talks a lot about her book, Stress Proof Your Life, is right next to me. So that's an unplanned shout out to her. But she really introduced me to that idea of stress can kill you. And that was a major wake up call for me. I said, I either have to quit my career, which I loved, or I need to figure out how to manage my stress, because if I don't figure out how to manage my stress, I'm going to be stressed in every job, every relationship, every environment. So that is where I have come now, where I have a very stressful job as a principal, but because I focus on wellness, mindfulness, and managing stress, I'm able to handle it much better than I could before.
You raise the dimension of the inner growth that you have navigated and gotten to undergo because of this too. But that as much as it has translated to external action, impactful action, that you are not the same person on the inside because you've learned that you also had to make changes there. Um, would you speak to any growth or, more about that growth of emotional, psychological, even spiritual, if it's relevant?
Sure. I think I have grown tremendously. And again, it has not been it wasn't like I woke up from that coma and was like, I'm a changed woman and my whole life has changed. Some of these things are still evolving. And even as I was managing my stress better, I got even better at it when I became pregnant with my son. And when I found out it was it was already a high risk pregnancy because of my heart, but then to find out his heart condition, um, I had to, for the first time, actually ask for help. I had to, for the first time, say, I can't do that. And I need to stop and take a break or eat my lunch and close the door. And I was terrified. I think, much like everybody else, I was afraid that if I said no, or if I admitted I needed help, that they would say, What do we pay you for? Like, you're the leader. You get paid more than we do. Do your job, right? And you hear that sometimes, and it's all over socials, right? Like, why am I the one doing all this? And all they do is bring us donuts, right? So I was really afraid. But what happened was that was the biggest vulnerability lesson for me. I got to finally put my money where its mouth was. All that research I had done, all those Brene Brown podcasts I had listened to. When I was pregnant, I stood in front of my staff and I cried at a staff meeting. And I said, I can't keep going at the pace I'm going. And I'm afraid that my baby is going to die. And I'm afraid that I am going to die, because both of those things were very real possibilities at that time. And in my mind, I had expected that they would scoff. But what they did was they lifted me up. They lifted me up, and they still lift me up. And with my vulnerability, they became more vulnerable and shared when they were struggling and when they needed help. And it brought our whole staff together, that this is a place where you can say, today's not a great day. Can you help me out? And so that was a really huge moment for me, where I learned finally, where I think it finally clicked, that vulnerability is not a weakness, that saying you are struggling and needs help doesn't have the negative repercussions that you think it's going to have. So that I always credit, when I speak about my story, that my pregnancy was really the turning point. And then he was a really difficult baby. Love him. He was a very difficult baby, really bad colic, and they still supported me through all of that. So, yeah, that's a big piece.
I just want to underline what you just shared so well, that vulnerability is not a weakness and that it also can't be faked. because what I heard as you said all that was how authentic it was, and the fear and the pain and the all of that. You don't get to just say, "Oh, I'm vulnerable," with some like half-hearted share. It has to hurt and be scary, or it
Yes.
doesn't resonate with the other human beings. And I just want to underline that and celebrate it because you're absolutely right.
Thank you. Brene says it takes courage, and it really does. It takes courage to be vulnerable. So when we might think it's weak, when somebody else shares a very vulnerable story, you say, wow, that's so amazing. But often we look at ourselves and say, don't say that, Heather. You would seem so weak. It takes so much bravery and courage to really speak your truth about how you're feeling and to be vulnerable even with yourself, to admit to yourself that you're struggling, which was 50% of the battle for me, to be able to admit to myself, you feel bad. You don't feel well physically because you are not okay. Like you're not okay and you need to do something differently was the first half of that for me.
Would it be okay if I pivot to identity a little bit?
Yeah.
You have described how much of this what happened to you has permeated your work and how it's driven your sense of fairness and justice and service, and it's informed all that direction. But I also hear you acknowledging how you had to take a step back and you can't go about things the way you used to go about things. So how do you operate with such a strong sense of cause and purpose identity without it becoming the sense of who you are entirely?
So something I have had to get better with, and again, I am a recovering perfectionist. I'm not, perfect at all these things yet, but boundaries. And I feel like that's a buzzword and people think like boundaries and what does that really mean? But to me, boundaries are telling people how you want to be treated, telling people, this is where I'm at right now. This is where I'm at today. And I really have embraced that idea of telling somebody no isn't going to make them hate you. Telling somebody no doesn't mean you'll never get the opportunity again. But if I say yes to this and I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to bring resentment. I'm not going to bring my A game and I'm not going to enjoy it. So then why be there? I've had to just get much better at defining boundaries and telling people, you know what, I can't do that right now, or hey, I don't love the way you treated me right there too is part of it. And so that takes a lot of bravery and vulnerability and courage as well.
Yeah, gosh, you're touching on so many things that a leader, whether by title or action, in any field could benefit from.
Yeah, it's
Benefit from
it's
hearing.
hard. It's hard work. And listen, my staff is annoyed with hearing me say the word Brene Brown. But really, I do credit so much of that to her. She has a leadership podcast, and I say it's the best professional development I have ever gotten because when you really put yourself out there, and it pays off. And she has research that says that the bosses with clear boundaries who tell people no are actually more well liked because they're predictable, right? If you know, listen, I'm not going to ask about that because that's a no-go for her. You're going to get a predictable response from me versus a person where you don't really know where their head is at. It might be yes, it might be no, it might be emotional, it might be, angry. But having those clear boundaries actually helps you build relationships. So that was one of those turning point moments for me as well when I realized that.
Yeah, it builds trust because they feel like they
Yeah.
know you and they know who you're going to show up as
Yes,
instead of, yeah.
exactly. When people say, like those surveys about safety in the workplace, I think people misunderstand the word safety sometimes. And they're thinking, like, of course it's safe here. Like, I meet a lot of principals or superintendents or leaders, and they're like, of course it's safe. You're not unsafe working conditions like mold or, I don't know, a fire. Like, and I'm like, no, there's so much more to us. What we mean by safety is you don't think you're going to get your head bit off for asking a question, right? Trust is my other passion topic. So now I'm very excited to hear you say the word trust because that one is a big, big one for me. That we implemented this framework of trust in our school, and it was transformative. When you really center on trust, everything else follows. And I don't think you can have success without it.
Yeah. How I'm thinking about this notion of preparedness that is a part of your message here, not just awareness, but actual physical preparedness for emergencies, so to speak. And I know you speak to adults and teachers, all sorts of people, but also students.
Mhm.
How do you speak to this preparedness without people getting sort of overly consumed with worry about something bad happening?
Sure. And you do have varying degrees, and I do try to start my classes or even my talks with trigger warnings now because that was feedback I had gotten pretty early on in sharing my story, and I felt terrible. I thought in the description of my speech, it said that I was going to talk about sudden cardiac arrest, and so I didn't really think about it, and I threw up a picture of me in a coma. And that was really upsetting for some people. And the feedback that I got was, oh, I would have loved a trigger warning. So I try to be mindful of that because we don't know people's experiences. You might have had a loved one pass away really recently, or, who knows? So I try to keep that in mind. But for kids in particular, they're the easiest to teach because they don't have as much of that what if or, uh-oh, something bad's going to happen. So I'm a really big believer in terms of safety, CPR in particular, CPR AED. The younger we start, the better, even if it's a 5-year-old with a teddy bear instead of a mannequin. That mommy's not answering you. What do? We call 911 and we push on her chest, or we call 911 and we wait if we're too little. But they don't have that fear that we have as adults to say, uh-oh, a cracked rib, or uh-oh, should I touch a woman's chest, or will I get a sexual assault or sexual harassment lawsuit, which the answer is no. So I think the younger the better because we normalize it for them. In terms of the adults, I have not really run into anybody that was like, "Oof, this is not something I would want to do." There are plenty of people in my TikTok reel comments that say things like that, and I don't know if they're just being trolls. But the people that I have been able to train have been so grateful and so empowered, saying, wow, this is so cool that everything I need to save a life is in my two hands. And now I know how to do it because I think there's nothing worse as a human being to watch something happen to somebody else and stand there feeling helpless. I think people having that power just makes them feel very good to know what to do.
Yeah. You raised the notion of the internet in relation to this and how it could just be so vicious even when, I mean, who could seriously argue about
Ugh,
against any of these things? It should be so cut and dry, and yet the internet's got some either bots or people that will still
yeah.
um jump into the negativity. How do you stay oriented toward your north star that you've articulated when life happens and we all kind of get off track sometimes? How do you notice yourself getting off track, and how do you get back on?
So, in terms of these people in the comments, it is so hard sometimes to not engage. And to an extent, I think to myself, like, wow, if they really have this false belief, I need to educate them. So, sometimes I'll take the route of here's an article, here's the research, here's some data. And other times I need to delete what I commented or just turn off comments for a while, right? Because it is such a passion topic for me that it literally hurts my soul to hear some of these comments sometimes. But the longer you're there, I think like anything else, you can learn to tune it out or to giggle or to let it go. But for me, it does just help prove that these conversations are needed. If it is causing this much of an uproar, this conversation is needed. So it proves why we need advocates to still be talking about this topic. It proves why we need more laws, because I've had lawmakers tell me, you don't need laws for this. People will just do it out of the goodness of their heart. They'll just want to learn CPR. They'll just want to do AED. And that's clearly not what I'm seeing entirely in the comments world. So we need policy for these things. In terms of, myself, I'm nowhere near perfect. I've said that a few times, and my mental health is nowhere near perfect. And like any other human, there are ups and downs and other days. And something for me that has come a long way in my life. I've always been a big feeler. I've always had big feelings. I see it in my son. He feels all the feels, and I didn't necessarily know how to identify those feelings, and I didn't know how to react to them. And would always end up with me feeling like I was a bad person, right? You have this outburst or you're hard on yourself, and then you're like, oh, gosh, I'm a bad person for doing that. That's what, I've learned so much. Shout out again to my school counselor and school social worker. And watching them navigate this with little kids has actually taught me so much about identifying your feelings, honoring them, and figuring out what to do with them in a positive way. And so for me, now that I am better at that, it's acknowledging I am feeling really anxious today. And I will say that to my coworker, to my husband. I'll say, I feel really anxious and I need to take a break. And that's, going upstairs when I get home from work for just 20 minutes of silence and not feeling guilty that I'm a bad mom, because that's being a good mom. That's ensuring that I'm not going to be snapping and yelling at my son. That's making sure I'm okay before I interact with him. So definitely giving myself breaks, honoring my feelings, taking a day off if I need a day off is something I never would have done in the past. Saying no. I had to back out of something recently, which I never would have done, but to say, I just really can't make it. I can't do it today, and I'm sorry. So just giving myself grace, and it's so hard. It is so, so hard, but I'm working on
Yeah.
it.
Well, especially when you're as driven by a cause larger than yourself, like you are,
Mhm.
I can imagine the feelings that might arise from that low energy state where we're sort of more vulnerable to our own saboteurs inside.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. And feeling guilty. And, I think maybe to answer the last part of that question, which I'm just remembering now, is in those moments, I start to remember my gratitude. So, gratitude practices and thinking about how lucky I am to even be here to feel these feelings. Like, I should not be alive today. There are other people who aren't alive today that went through the same thing. And I am lucky to be here, to have the opportunity to help. And so I will honor my feelings and honor the time I need. But then, girl, you got to get back up on the horse, because there's a lot of work to do and the world needs you, right?
yeah. How have your beliefs changed on the other side of this event?
Ooh, what type of beliefs?
Any sort of beliefs. It could be what is the meaning of life? It could be what happens after we die. It could be why am I here? Or do I believe people are inherently good or bad? I just riffing off the top of my head.
Ooh, yes. I love an origin story. I'm a person who loves autobiographies and documentaries, and I love to see what makes people tick. And I get that from my dad. He's like a history buff type of guy, but I love psychology, and I do think inherently everybody is good. And I think that is now more of my belief than it was in the past. Before, I tended to believe that people were purposefully hurting people, and sometimes that does happen. But now I have more of the lens of what happened to you, and the Bruce Perry and Oprah book, What Happened to You? Of wow, that person is having this really big, unkind reaction, but wow, what is going on in their world that is making them act this way? So I definitely have a more trauma-informed lens, thanks to my job and my work too, than I did in the past. Of everybody's coming from a place of somewhere, their lens, they have their own history. And so trying to figure out why that person is that way is something that I enjoy to do. In general, though, I do more than ever just believe that life is too short to be unhappy in anything that you are doing, whether it's a relationship, a job, a hobby. Of course, it takes privilege to be able to say, just leave your job or just leave that relationship. I know it's much more complex than that. But I do think we take life, myself included, way too seriously. And I think we focus a lot of times on the wrong things, where we really are just here to have fun, to help other people, to learn, grow, and I think we just take it way too seriously. And
Yeah.
younger Heather, who just only cared about being successful and climbing that ladder, I still love to be successful. I'm a type 3 Enneagram, so I love awards. Um, but that's not all consuming like it was before. It's
Yeah.
nice now, and I love to have a goal. That's what makes me tick. But if I don't get something, I'm not totally crushed anymore.
Yeah. We've gotten to talk so much about how you have evolved, before this, during this, after this. What if we look forward as you look at the runway of life ahead? Are there particular shifts or even values that you would hope to become more central in your life that are maybe just showing up a little bit? What
Oh,
do you
I
hope? What do
just
you expect of future Heather, I guess?
I am not perfect. I'm still learning these life lessons, and it has been hard for me. And I go around the country and I speak about stress and balancing your life and this work life balance and how to counterbalance and show up as your best self. And even I am going to be changing jobs pretty soon here in the summer. I'll be switching from being a building principal to being a director of teaching and learning for my son's school district as he enters pre-K. And I was not thinking that I would leave my job. I was thinking that I would be a principal forever. I loved it. It has been so fulfilling. My staff feels like a family, and truly they will be friends for life. I feel some of them are soulmates in some regards. And it really didn't hit me that I needed a change until one day we were playing at home, and I have a 3-year-old and he's very sassy. And I said, I love you. And he said, I love daddy. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, like typical 3-year-old. He's kind of trying to hurt my feelings because he has fun. And I said, oh, you don't love mommy? And he said, well, I love daddy and mommy loves work. And it was a sucker punch to the gut. It knocked the wind out of me. And to some people, they could say, oh, toddlers just say things. But I tend to believe that out of the mouths of babes come the harshest truths and realities, just unfiltered. And in that moment, I said, something is not right. I don't want my son to ever grow up thinking that he wasn't my number one priority. So even in that moment where he might have been being cheeky, for him to say that he loved daddy and I love work, it was on his mind that I must be talking about work a lot more than I thought I was talking about work. So I sought out this position that will be less day-to-day stress, closer to home, in the building where my son will be, so I won't ever have to miss, the first day of school, a class party, anything. I'll be able to just pop in and be there. And it's been hard. It is not, again, I'm excited for the change, but also I really loved where I was. But I know that to be the best mom, to be the mom that I want to be, I need to do this, even if it's hard.
I really appreciate you sharing that. First, because it encapsulates your vulnerability once again. But second of all, because it's a tough decision, and uh, it's great that you bear witness to it for our listeners, because
Thank you. And
sometimes those
it's
are the best decisions.
sometimes we need those interventions from other people. We need people in our lives to show up and say, hey, this is a problem. And I'm grateful that I heard that from my son before it was too late, before we are, that he's 18 and saying, Mom, I wish you would have been there more, or work was consuming you. And so, even I am still trying to figure out this thing we call life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's awesome. Good
Thank
luck with
you.
it.
Thank you.
Can I offer up a fictional scenario to
Sure.
entertain?
Sure.
You have the entire world's attention for a minute, and you can advocate for one value that you think that everyone would be better off if they would just adopt it more centrally in their lives.
Mhm.
What would that value be that you're advocating for? And what would be your sales pitch about it?
Assume positive intent is a phrase that a former coworker told me. Um, and I struggle with this. I will just be honest. I already talked a little bit about this, but I can tend to have hey, they did that on purpose to hurt me, or hey, that kind of defensive reaction. And to assume that everybody is doing the best they can with what they have. Assume that people are not trying to hurt you. It just gives people the benefit of the doubt. When you stop feeling like the victim all the time and you put it in that lens of, uh-oh, do they need help today? It just makes you more positive and happy. So I'd say that's one of the biggest lessons that I'm working on in this life that I would love for others to do the same, that assume that when people do something, they're showing up with positive intent.
Yeah, that could undo a lot of misunderstandings.
Yeah, right. Because I genuinely think that most people, most of the time, are trying to do what they think is right. And even that, if that's the polar opposite of what you believe is right, they think it's right. So let's try to understand where we're coming from, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, we've got that going on in our society right now for sure.
Yeah. Um, this question might seem out of left field, but what are you willing to be wrong about?
I am wrong quite a bit. And it took me a long time to be able to admit I was wrong in my day to day work. It took me a long time to be able to say, yeah, oops, I messed that up. I think I am willing to be wrong with most things. But like most people, I am sensitive and I appreciate a more gentle delivery of, yeah, that wasn't it. We're all humans. We make mistakes. And that's something I tell my son all the time. Accidents happen. We make mistakes. We thought this would work. It didn't work. Am I bummed that it was the wrong thing? Sure. But we can always learn something. And I have a mentor who always says, well, what's the silver lining? I'll call her and say, like, oh gosh, like this didn't go the way I wanted it to. This meeting just derailed. And she said, okay, but what's the silver lining? What did you learn? And I am truly one of those people that believes that failure is learning and growth. And I think that I am so successful because I have failed so much. I have fallen on my face many times. I have put my foot in my mouth many times. And what I've just had to do is be reflective, figure out what went wrong, apologize where I need to, and then do better, right? And that's what being human is about.
Yeah. Is there anything you hope that we would touch on or talk about that we haven't touched on yet?
Oh, no. I know everybody will learn CPR after listening to this and how to use an AED, and you'll buy an AED for your home and you'll advocate for CPR and AEDs in public places. But, at the end of the day, I never want people to look at what I am doing and feel like I'm not doing as much as her. When I speak to other survivors or families who have lost someone, I say, your journey is your journey. I have chosen this to be my path and to do the things I'm doing, but there's a lot of things I'm not doing that other survivors are doing. So every path looks different. And that's a message I would give to my younger self too, is stop comparing yourself to other people. Everybody struggles. Everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's doing everything there is to do. So I get that a lot. I get a lot of people saying like, wow, you just do it all. And no, I don't. And my house is very messy, if that makes you feel better as well.
Vulnerability.
I just I don't have the cognitive space for that, right? I've got too much else going on. So
Yeah. If people want to follow you or connect with you, how can they find you?
yeah, you can find me on TikTok and Instagram as Heather's Heart Squad. There is also a Heather's Heart Squad Facebook page that I need to do better at posting on. I try to make reels every so often, so check them out. And yeah, just all on the socials. And I love to connect. I love a direct message with your stories, with your reactions. I love to meet people, so I would love for people to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you. I hope that they do. And I hope that people hear the impact that you're making, and it also maybe can energize them either in a related or unrelated way that they
Yeah,
connect to.
thank
Thank you,
you.
Heather.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of Because This Matters. I believe that these are conversations that matter. If something from this conversation spoke to you, please consider sharing it with someone. Maybe take a moment to like, rate, follow, or subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube. You can learn more about my work as a coach and speaker at markpoise.com. Until next time, remember that a life aligned with values is a fulfilled one.